Well, good morning, everybody. This is Chris Dew with E1, and I want to welcome you to our session today on a focus for moving from Dynamics SL to Business Central and how Popdock can help you in that process. Just a quick little agenda. We're going to kind of talk about one of the main problems here today. Why is this an issue? Why are we bringing this up? And before we get into that, we'll just kind of discuss a couple terms that maybe not everybody is familiar with, and then we'll just kind of talk about the solution and talking about being able to access this data in other systems. I'd love to hear questions that you may have along the way. So I would encourage everyone to ask those questions in the question pane of the GoToWebinar, and we'll get to as many of them as we can. So let's start with, again, what is the problem? And I think one of the biggest issues, right, with people that have been on SL for years or maybe decades, in the case of, a few of them that we're running into, is that you'll find that not all of that data comes over, and sometimes it's not even desirable to bring over all the data, but you may want to bring a subset of it. Maybe it's the past 7 years, or maybe there's 3 years, or I even heard some people have like a 15-year requirement. Whatever the requirements are, being able to bring the data that is most relevant to you and being able to access it, I think, is probably the key part to it. Now, another part to this, and this is one we probably don't talk about, a lot of customers, I think, want to say, hey, we're going to move over and we want to bring 20 years of history. Well, that's not necessarily the right answer sometimes either, because the new system, you may be restructuring it. You maybe don't have some of those historical things that you used to have. Maybe it's vendors that you haven't worked with in 15 years. Or customers that haven't bought anything, in a decade. Like, does some of those things, does that make sense to set up those customers and vendors and all kinds of things like that inside of the new system, just so you can see the history? So those are some of those I guess more challenging questions sometimes. And then again, when we talk about restructuring, sometimes you are vastly changing things. Maybe again, it's an account structure, right? If you're going to Business Central, which is one of the things we're talking about today, you may have an account structure that is vastly different now with the dimensions inside of Business Central. So how do we handle those kinds of scenarios and make sure that you can bring meaningful data back? So that's kind of some of the challenges here is how do we access this? And again, I'll maybe even add another thing. How do we access it without maintaining that SQL server that SL's been on for, again, possibly decades? So this is where we're gonna start proposing some solutions here in a second. Is how do we make sure that we can access that and allow you to, at some point in time, turn off that SQL server, not have to maintain it anymore as you go forward. Okay. So, terms. Two terms I want to bring up here. We're going to talk a little bit about gateways today, and we're going to talk about Azure Data Lakes. So, these are terms that maybe aren't familiar to everybody here, but a gateway, essentially, when we're talking about an on-premise type solution, which again in some way SL is going to be, is how do we securely provide a way of hooking into that system to connect to that data and extract it and make it available to Business Central. So a gateway is a secure way. We'll talk about that in just a second more. Azure Data Lakes is another thing that, again, this is maybe a newer term for some of you, but this is a fantastic way to store this information in the cloud in a cost-effective way. What I'll say this, for most people that have under, we'll call it a terabyte. If you have under a terabyte of data, for most of you, it's going to cost way less than $20 a month to store that information in your own Azure Data Lake. And so all an Azure Data Lake really is a storage account in your Azure account, and it basically can store, unlike a database where everything is very structured, This can store all kinds of stuff. So it can store things like CSV files, it could store XML, it could store Excel files, it could actually store extracted files, right? So if you have images that were embedded or documents or PDFs or whatever, we can access all those kinds of things and store those in a data lake. So again, for all practical purposes, it's just a very cost-effective way of storing whatever data that you like. Okay, so now that we have a couple terms, I want to go back to the gateways because this is a huge part of this mix, because we, again, most people have spent many years keeping it safe, right? Making sure that your data isn't accessed from outside of your network. And what we're doing is we're kind of changing the paradigm here. We're saying, hey, you know what? We need to be able to securely access your SL data so that we can move it up into the cloud, right? To move it into your Azure solution so that it becomes available for use in something like Business Central or potentially other systems as well. So this is basically what we have is a simple gateway that can be installed on-premise that now Popdock communicates with that instead of directly to your SQL Server, and so it just provides another mechanism and a way of keeping it locked down as we extract that data out. Okay, so let's talk about the solution, right? Whether you have a couple different scenarios, right? There are some people that will want to maintain that SQL Server, maybe for a period of time, maybe it's a couple of years, maybe it's 12 months, maybe it's 2-3 years, maybe it's more. Some people say, you know what, we're just going to keep our SL server the way it was, and we just need a way of accessing that. So we'll talk about a solution there. Some people, I have heard of them hosting their database somewhere else, and so I know there are a number of providers that may provide a solution for hosting that. You can certainly do that, and again, Popdock can once again use that. And then we're going to obviously talk about a data lake option as well. So let's go ahead, and I want to show you a quick little demo and get you some ideas thinking about how you can utilize this. So instead of starting inside of Popdock, we're actually going to go inside of Business Central, because this is where I think if you were moving to Business Central, if this is a solution, or again, even if you were moving to Acumatica or outside other like NetSuite or Intact, right? We have ways of embedding this data, but for our purposes today, we're going to show it to you inside of Business Central. So what I want to show you is that we have Popdock embedded inside of Business Central. And if we look at this first list, my default list that pops up is not historical data. This is actually a look at live Business Central data. But this is for any of you that used quick queries inside of SL. This is essentially your quick queries for Business Central. So a lot of the, some of the similar things, we can add, any columns that we want, right? So if I wanted to add, I don't know, I'm just adding a couple fields here. It's going to go out and grab that new data, and there we go. Some of it has information in it. If you want to remove columns, right? That's probably more common for some people, saying, hey, I don't need this one, and I don't need that one, right? So now you're down to just the columns you want. If we hit refresh, we can use all of our screen real estate. Some nice things in here, you have an unlimited amount of filters, right? So if you want to filter this data down, see if I have a date in here. So if I pick like a document date, probably one of the most common things in the accounting world, right? You see there's a ton of options for how we could filter that out. And in the past, I think a lot of times we'd say, hey, show me between this date and that date. But I'll show you, we have some really cool things in here we call comparisons. And so instead of needing to type all those different dates, you can actually say, you know what, I just want everything for this week or this month or last quarter, last year, right? These are the fun things that I think you save these filters. You can have an unlimited amount of them. Just keep mashing on the button. You can change an and to an or very quickly. And these are the types of things that really give your end users the power of working with their data, whether it's live data or historical data. So just want to show you that. Again, once you get it where you want it, people will save it as a favorite and share it with other team members or users, and it's a great way. You can even do this across companies, which is kind of fun, and it doesn't matter whether it's, well, I might actually save this. I'll show you this a little bit later when we look at some historical SL data. And then one other thing I wanted to point out is that we can actually do some grouping. So if I wanted to see by vendor on this example, I'm now getting subtotals by vendor, and I could still drill down and see all the transactions that were for that particular vendor, but you can do some really cool things there, and you can have an unlimited amount of those. So working with the data is really nice. But now let's get into SL, because what I want to show you is why we have this great interface that allows you to nail down any BC data. The key that we're talking about today is how can I actually access my historical SL data that, again, didn't come over. And what this is doing is it's allowing us to, again, the information that's been in an Azure Data Lake, we're able to hook into it here. So if I wanted to see, again, my sales order line items, it's now coming from the data lake, which was pushed from SL. And so now I have all my SL information. It has all the names of the fields that I would expect from SL. Same kind of thing, right? I can add, any new columns that I want inside of here, and it's going to go grab that information and show it to me. Looks like, okay, commission is the only thing. If we want to move that up, we can do that. So you have a lot of this flexibility. Even if you wanted to export this to Excel, right? I could do it right from inside of here, and it's dumped that information to Excel for me and put it into a table. And it's done it smoking fast. So what am I showing you here, right? Is it basically next to any of the new information from the live system, I can actually also show all my history, and I can basically, I only pushed about 10 different things here, but if you wanted to push any kind of thing that you've had in a quick query or like a view, for example, we can move into this solution and make it so that your end users can access that data. So let me show you one other application of this. If I open up a customer, what I want to show you is this customer has something kind of unique. We have Popdock embedded once again inside of Business Central. It has something kind of unique here because now instead of pulling all kinds of records, we're only pulling the ones for this particular customer. So with Popdock, without writing code, we can do some really cool things where we can embed this inside of here and we can filter it down to just this particular customer. So if we look at this list, what you'll see, while I told you this was some history, this actually has current information too. So this has the information, it's kind of what we call a merge list. So it's pulled information from their new transactions that are coming in from Business Central, but also, and in this case, I do apologize, this isn't SL, this is some old GP data, but it actually was GP data that was moved to the Azure Data Lake, and we're showing on this particular customer, we're able to show their new transactions and their historical transactions all in one place. And again, all without writing any code at all. This can be pushed right to Business Central. Okay, so let's talk about really how does this work. So I'm just going to quickly show you inside of here is that if we go into an SL connector that I have, I just want to show you very quickly that there's a lot of flexibility to this. So if I go into the list, you can see again, we have a ton of those, like I said, those standard quick queries, all the information that you want out of the box, but you're never stuck there. Anything that you built as new quick queries, or again, if you have a view, we can pull that in. And so you can see, for example, if I go under inventory, I have one available quick query that I could pull in just by hitting, checking the box, and now I have a brand new list. You can even create custom lists. So I talked about just an example of pulling some history from one list, and also the open transactions from Business Central. So we could basically take the SL historical data, we can merge it with the Business Central data, and we could have one list that had everything in it. So you can do some really cool things inside of here. Also, you can see that this is something that can be done across multiple companies. So this I happen to have 5 different SL companies. You can choose if there's some that you maybe don't want, maybe you had a test company and you wanted to remove that from here, you can remove those and you utilize it that way. Okay, so that's how we connect to the SL data. But now I want to talk just very briefly about how we actually interact with it in a data lake. And again, just a quick reminder that the data lake is just basically a repository, a place for us to store that data. Instead of like a database where your SQL server that you maintain today, this is something that again is hosted in Microsoft's your Azure account, and then again, it just stores some files instead of like a database. So if we look at this, what you'll see is I have a couple of lists I've added, but you can basically choose to add any list that you want. So I have this tied to my SL connector. If we wanted to add some payables information, sure, I'll do some payables, something. We could do like AP transactions, for example. Now, if I had a favorite in here, I can actually move a portion of the data. Now, why is that important, right? We started the day talking about what if I only had 7 years of data that I wanted to bring? Well, make that your favorite, right? Put a restriction on there that says, hey, I only want the last 7 years of data, and then that's what is going to get moved to the data lake. So just so that you know, you can choose which columns and their date range and whatever, and move just the data that you want. It's going to create a new list. So why don't I do one for today? I'll just call it 9/28. 28. Why did it do 28? 9/20. 9/20 today. Okay. And then I'm just going to show you one quick thing, because we have some really cool things in here. We have ways of optimizing that storage, which makes the files smaller, which makes it better to access later on. We have a way of when we're getting the data, we call it a chunking strategy. So think of it this way, right? They talk about how do you eat an elephant? Well, one bite at a time. Same kind of thing here, right? Is if you have 20 years of history and you have millions and millions of records in your database, it maybe isn't the best idea to grab them all, at that same moment. And so what we have is kind of a chunking where you bite off smaller bits and we send it up. So we have some default ways that are pretty optimized, but then you can also do custom ways and do it on whatever field you want. Okay, I'm gonna hit that button. Now, it has now started the process of moving that information to the data lake. So it's basically taken it from my SL server, and it is processing it and pushing it to the data lake and then making it accessible to Popdock. If I want to go look at the history of where it's at, you can actually see, here's our list, and while I only clicked it once, you can see it's running 5 times. Why is that? Well, it is doing that because it's doing it once for each company. And so if I hit refresh on this, we can actually see this one is done, this one's done, this one's done, and then, ooh, this one has an error. This is telling us that it wasn't created because there wasn't any records, which makes sense, right? If there's no data in there, we're not gonna just put a blank file. So now we have all those transactions are up there, and I'll show you how we can utilize that in a second. One last thing I want to point out, because I think this is important, is that we have the capability of not only doing specific lists, which I think for most people is probably the way that they would access the data, because you probably have 3, 5, 10 lists that you use every day, and that's what you're going to need to bring into Business Central so you can access it. But what I want to show you is that we can actually basically archive the entire databases. So you can see here I have 3 different SL databases. If I wanted to, I could go tick, 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 and I can move all of that data and move it up to the Azure Data Lake and have it archived for later on use. So let me show you this. We just added this new list, right, called AP Transactions 920. So if I want to look at what's in that, now instead of going to my SL connector, I'm going to my data lake, right, because that's where we've archived it to. And I'll choose this company, but I'll show you in just a second how we could actually switch to it if we like. So here we go. We are now pulling information that used to be in an SL database, but it's now coming from a data lake. The same kinds of things we can add, you know, if we wanted different columns, we can add those columns. We can go back to it. We can filter this. We can, you know, switch companies, right? So if I wanted to actually pull this from the Vineyard company instead, now it's pulling the transactions from that company. So you can see that you basically have a fantastic tool to not only archive the data for you, but then also bring it into BC or whatever other system that you want. Okay, so let me quickly go back here. Again, whether today you're going to be hitting that SL server directly using Popdock and want to see that information in there, or you want to use the process that we have in there to move it to an Azure Data Lake, we have you covered. I wanted to talk about one other scenario here though, because there are times where you maybe need to embed in other systems besides, like I said, BC. And we have a no-code solution for Business Central, but there's other systems that you may want to embed this data in, and sometimes there's an option there that maybe has no code, or maybe it's a little bit of coding to embed it. But I want to get you thinking about where you can access this data, no matter what it is. So if we go back here real quick, what I want to show you is that basically I could take this brand new data that we pushed into the data lake from SL, and we can put it wherever we like. So if I go into this developer section here, we'll just add a new widget. I'll call it SL demo for a second. We have a number of types of widgets. I'm going to keep it really simple today. We're just going to pick one particular list, but I could do multiple lists. I can change the way it needs to look. We're going to point it to not the SL connector, but we're going to point it to the Azure Data Lake connector. And I'll go ahead and I'll pick the Vineyard one this time, and we'll pick this list. And again, if you created favorites even on that data lake data, you can actually utilize those and just present a subset. But what I want to show you is that we can either use the default fields that will be on there, or I could choose how I want that to display. If there's maybe only 5 fields that I want to present as a default, I can choose that and still allow them to do it another way. I'm going to show you, we have options, right? If you don't want to allow the export to Excel, you don't have to check that, right? Or again, we haven't really talked about this, but we can have related lists of information. So I could have some SL data. I could maybe start with a customer, and I could actually have a drill down to maybe their orders, or maybe some address information, or some other types of history, their receivables. I can basically have all these details that are anything that's related, and it doesn't even have to be the same connector. It can be pulling live e-commerce orders, right? If that made sense, as long as you have something that has a relationship to it, we can connect those kinds of things. But I'll go ahead and add everything inside of here, and then we'll go ahead and hit preview. Now, what I want to show you, there's our list, right? Here's our list that is basically those AP transactions for the Coho Vineyard. Now, this is great. It looks kind of like Popdock, but again, if you were going to embed this inside of Business Central, well, we already apply a theme, but just to show you, now it looks and feels like Business Central, right? Or if you were getting, again, going somewhere else in some other family, if you were going to go to NetSuite, for example, now we make this data, even though it's historical SL data, it looks and feels native to whatever system that you're putting it inside of. So we'll go back to Business Central for this one. But here's the last part I want to show you here, because what we've done, I talked about no code or low code. So if we were going to embed this inside of Business Central, for example, what it's doing at this moment is it's going out to there and it's loading every page inside of Business Central. And so every custom page, right, if your partner has created a customization or you guys have done it internally, it will pull all of those pages, the standard ones and any custom one. So again, if we were going to embed this data, this is a payables transactions, it probably makes sense to do it on a vendor, right? So if I look for a vendor, we could put it on the vendor card, and there's two different areas. So there's a fast tab, which is kind of that middle section, and then there's a fact box, which is kind of a sidebar. So you can choose where you want to put it. And then here's the last key part, right, is that you may want to filter this down, right? I don't want all the AP transactions. If I'm embedding it on the vendor card, I only want to see it for that vendor. And so this is where you add a parameter, and this basically, because we pointed it to the vendor card page, it's pulling those fields off of the vendor card. So I can quickly hit, number, and I can match that back to what probably the vendor ID, for example, and now I can filter that down so that I only show those particular things. And at the end of the day, like I said, you don't have to write code. You hit publish, and this is something that is now embedded inside of Business Central, for example. Okay. So what I hope you have gathered in this is a quick little overview, is that you have a great tool in Popdock to not only extract the data out of your SL system, or again, maybe it's sometimes you keep that running and we just access it, but we can also, move it to a data lake, and we can access that data, whether it's in BC or some other system, and make sure that you never lose access to your historical data, and we can embed it wherever your people work. So if you do want to go a bit further with this, we do have a deep dive planned for Thursday. So same time slot at 10, and we'll dig into a bit more of the technical side of things, and just go a bit deeper. So I guess now, if there are any questions, I would love to answer them for you, and see if we can get those going. Okay, first question is, how far back can you go for SL? We can go all the way back to 2011. So if you have SL 2011 on up, we can pull that historical information in. If it's a version prior to that was on SQL, we have a chance of we can get at the data, but we may need to do a little more work. Okay, we got another question on what is the cost for Popdock and the Azure Data Lake. So an Azure Data Lake, again, it does depend on how much data you're storing out there. For like I said, if you had up to a terabyte of data, you're probably not spending more than $20 a month. Most people are probably spending dollars a month, under $5 for that data storage and access. But it obviously can, if you have a heavy usage, it could drive it up, a little bit. But again, I have never heard of anybody paying more than about $20 a month. So that's a really good option. Now on the Popdock side of things, it's about $199 a month for the solution that allows you to, access that data and embed it right inside of Business Central. So that should cover you there. Another question is, what SL queries come with Popdock out of the box? And then, sorry, all of the SL quick queries. So yes, basically all the standard SL quick queries are there for you out of the box. Any of the ones that you have created, they'll be optional. You can add them as you like. So basically, again, you can access every piece of information in there, as long as you have basically a view at the end of the day, a SQL view to pull that data. Good question. Okay, I think that's all the questions I have. So if you do think of any more questions, happy to let you know. I'll throw up a few emails here if you want to contact our sales or support team. We got a lot of friendly faces that are happy to help you no matter where you're located. And again, I'd encourage you, if you want to dig in just a little bit deeper technically, on Thursday we're going to go a little bit deeper on some of these solutions. So thank you everyone, and have a wonderful day.